Well, if there's one thing that Democrats do, it's spend money. So I don't think it'll be trouble getting Democrats on board. I think the real worry is actually going to be the conservatives in the House and the Senate, because you're also looking at about a $100 billion supplemental that will be used for hurricane relief. The president also wants to build a wall, and there are a lot in Congress that want to build a wall. Now, that's only about $1.8 billion, but still, something's got to give, because if you're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure, where are you going to get that money? The House and the Senate passed a $47 trillion 10-year budget, but there wasn't any cuts to spending. So conservatives actually will be on the hot seat probably more than the Democrats.
Well, you know, as you pointed out, rightly so, Democrats love to spend money, typically. So they should love this. I mean, this is something that Chuck Schumer has been asking for years. If there's anywhere where these folks can meet in the middle in Washington, D.C., Representative, you would think it would be infrastructure.
Yes, and it's going to come up quickly. January 19th is when the continuing resolution runs out. But again, the question is, if you're also going to go out and spend, like I said, close to $100 billion rebuilding Texas, Florida, Louisiana, and other parts that were hit by the hurricane, then how are you going to actually fund this? Where are you going to cut? Because there aren't many places that Congress has identified. I think it's the one story coming out to 2017 that really was a mystery to me. It was just, I couldn't believe that Republicans sort of gave up the mantle of fiscal discipline. I don't think you have to justify allowing the American people to keep their own money in their own wallets. But if you don't cut spending, then you're still going to rack up amazing deficits. And I don't see how you get from here to there.
All right. Well, you know, some people look at the tax cut as a form of spending. Now, the hope is it grows our economy enough. And I think it will contribute to growth for sure. The question is, how much growth? Is it enough growth, Representative, to actually make up for what it's going to cost? And, you know, as you look towards an infrastructure program, what that's going to cost.
Well, look, if you went back to when President Trump was inaugurated, and you said that we were going to be north of a 3% growth rate, if you thought the stock market was going to be where it's at, everybody would have laughed. Everybody would have said, no, President Trump's not going to be able to get anything done, get anything passed. Now, President Trump has had an advantage so far in being able to use the tool of reconciliation, where he only has to get 50 people in the Senate to actually vote in favor of a tax package. But that reconciliation tool is gone. Now you have to go and get 60 votes. And you're right, that's where you've got to go find those 8 Democrats in order to come along with your overall spending plan. And they're going to push on immigration. They're going to push on other things too, not just the infrastructure spending.
Well, Representative, if they do not move forward on immigration, I'm talking about the Democrats right now, isn't that going to haunt them politically come 2018? So if you're approaching this from just a sheer political perspective, if you're Donald Trump and if you're the Republicans, don't you want infrastructure to be next? Because I'll tell you, if Democrats vote against that, they're seemingly voting against one of the basic things that they have been arguing for years.
Yeah, I think they can get them on infrastructure. Where do you find the money? I don't know, but it's going to be really difficult for the Democrats. At this point, they've been pretty much a stiff arm and a blockade, saying they're going to be no on anything that Donald Trump suggests. I mean, Democrats used to support the idea that they were going to reduce the corporate income tax, but then suddenly, because now it's Donald Trump, they were opposed to it. So I think infrastructure is good common ground. Republicans haven't been bashful in spending money. Democrats like to spend money. The question is, where are you going to get all that money after you're spending all the money on the supplemental for the hurricane relief?
Entitlement reform, is that, I mean, you know, when you look at the money we spend, for example, on things like Medicaid, I mean, these are the opportunities that we could take to start cutting, and how much might it save us?
Well, it will save a lot if you can get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse, but every administration talks about it and doesn't do much about it. I do think more block grants to the states, letting the governors and the state legislators be in control, would be much more efficient. It would actually save a lot of money. But if you listen to Mick Mulvaney, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, he presents to the president almost on a monthly basis, hey, look, this is where the real money is. It's almost 3/4 of the spending of the $4+ trillion that we spend in this government. But thus far, the president has not wanted to tackle Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. They did make good progress on Obamacare, getting rid of the individual mandate. But yeah,
this is why, once you give something, this is why entitlement reform is so difficult. I mean, once you give it, it's very hard, Representative, to take it back. Yeah. And no politician, I would imagine, wants to be in that position where they look like they're denying someone something that they had previously gotten. And he has said over and over again that he wouldn't go near Social Security and that Social Security would be safe for folks. So that would be challenging, certainly, for the president and for the Republicans, I imagine, if they tried to take some of those things away. Let me ask you this, Representative. Do you think the Democrats don't actually want the economy to do well?
You know, allowing the American people to keep their own money in their own pockets. I mean, Nancy Pelosi was calling that Armageddon. Chuck Schumer, it was just, they'll rue the day. I mean, unanimously, Democrats said we don't want the American people to keep more of their own money in their own wallets. So I don't know what it is they think they're going to run on. And if you look at where we're going to be 6, 8, 12 months from now when we actually have elections, I think the Democrats are overplaying their hand, because anything and everything that Republicans do is somehow wrong. I don't see them coming to the table with alternatives or tweaks or saying, hey, here's what we'd like to suggest to make the bill better. And I think that's reflecting through to the American people.
Well, and people don't like that, right? Americans don't like that. This is why they're so frustrated with Washington, because no one was getting anything done. I mean, we saw 8 years of that gridlock. Right. That's why the Federal Reserve had to be so aggressive. There was no economic policy that was meaningful coming out of Washington. Now you're starting to see that. And tax reform, by most accounts, is going to be quite stimulative to our economy. So I just question whether, you've got Democrats there who are sort of looking at this rather begrudgingly, wishing that the market wasn't doing this well, wishing that the unemployment numbers were actually worse, wishing that wages would not increase, because politically speaking, if the Republicans have a win with this, it makes it very difficult in 18.
When people are feeling good with their own pocketbooks, they've got a job, they're getting a promotion, and you look at some of the indicators about home ownership and the way people are feeling confident in the economy, every one of those indicators under President Trump is going up in a positive direction. And that's just the reality. And people vote locally. They vote on how they're feeling, how their company's doing, whether their friends are getting jobs. And I'm just telling you, President Trump, I think, exceeded all expectations in 2017. He's buoyed going into 2018. But January 19th, mark that date, Trish, because funding the government is going to be a battle royale, and it's coming up before we know it.
I know, indeed, indeed. But I agree with you. I think, the economy really, when it comes down to it, is the #1 issue. Besides people's physical security, they want to be financially safe and they want to be physically safe.
That's right.
So we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much. Jason Chaffetz, so good to see you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
President Trump slamming the FBI's deputy director on Twitter one day after former director James Comey defends the Bureau's top lawyer. New York Congressman Peter King is joining me live next. And remember, you can follow us on Twitter at Sunday Futures. Stay with us as we look ahead on this Christmas Eve on Sunday Morning Futures. See you here. Now, President Trump on the attack on Twitter this weekend. Yesterday, the president took aim at FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, suggesting he has a conflict of interest with Hillary Clinton and referencing some reports that he may be retiring very soon, tweeting, quote, FBI Director Andrew McCabe is racing the clock to retire with full benefits. 90 days to go. Let's bring in New York Congressman Peter King. He sits on the House Homeland Security, Intelligence, and Financial Services Committees. He is also chairman of the House Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and Intelligence. So good to see you. Merry Christmas this morning.
Merry Christmas to you, Trish.
Representative, do you think Andrew McCabe is about to retire, and do you think he needs to retire?
Yeah, I mean, all the indications are that he is, and yes, I think he should. There's been so many questions raised. Listen, I've worked with Andrew McCabe over the years in my position on the Intelligence Committee and Homeland Security Committee, but the issues that have come up in the last 16 months regarding the Hillary Clinton investigation, regarding the opening of the investigation against the Trump campaign, and the would appear to be conflicts of interest that Andy McCabe has had. To me, it's better for everyone that he does step aside. And again, maybe there's more to it even than that, but at the very least, because of these apparent conflicts and contradictions, I think his time has come, yes.
I don't know how someone is able to lead the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails when his own wife, who was running for state senate, actually received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Clinton supporters. How does that get cleared, Representative, through the Ethics Committee?
I don't even know if he gave it to the Ethics Committee. I don't know how much was disclosed. And it wasn't just he was getting from people close to Hillary Clinton. There's probably very few people in politics closer to the Clinton campaign than Terry McAuliffe. I mean, I've known Terry McAuliffe for years. He is a very, very close personal friend of the Clintons and a political ally. And the fact that he was steering 500, 700,000, whatever the number was, to Andy McCabe's wife in a hotly contested race in Virginia, to me, that is such an apparent conflict on its face. I don't know how he stayed in it, how he was allowed to stay in it, and how that doesn't really marginalize him forever. And to be, again, the investigation of Hillary Clinton itself was so sensitive, was so vital, and to have Andy McCabe having any role in that at all, to me, goes against all the ethical standards that we should be having in the FBI and the federal government. Let me just emphasize now, I think 99% of the people in the FBI, outstanding Americans, what we're talking about is what was going on at the top.
Yeah, look, I mean, and this is why people are so frustrated, really, with Washington, because there is this perception, Representative, that there's a lot of cronyism, there's a lot of sort of greasing of palms, and, you know, regardless of what this was, the reality remains that his wife, the woman who is likely the closest person to him in the world, is getting a lot of money from Clinton friends and associates and people that want to see Clinton succeed. And so, you know, that in and of itself, you would think, Representative, would be enough for him to say, okay, you know, we got a Chinese wall in my family, and I either, number one, can't allow my wife to take that money, or number two, cannot be running this investigation.
Right, that investigation, and then right around that same time was the opening of the investigation against the Trump campaign, which he also had an involvement in. And again, we don't know all the specifics yet, but if that investigation was premised on that dossier and on Carter Page, if that was the basis to have an unprecedented investigation into a presidential campaign, then that, to me, raises the most serious constitutional and civil liberties issues, because that also would have involved then getting a FISA warrant, which is really the most intrusive. I support FISA, but that is the most intrusive type of investigation you can have, and there have to be such strict standards met for that. And if they were basing it on a dossier which was put together, in effect, or commissioned by the Clinton campaign, and Carter Page, who had no real role in the campaign, and everything he did was public, to use that as the basis for this unprecedented investigation, that if Andy McCabe in any way involved in that, raises, again, serious, serious issues that go beyond, really, that to me is more significant than the Clinton investigation.
You know, Representative King, that dossier was out there, largely discredited. No member of the media, I mean, other than, you know, late to the table, BuzzFeed, and you can question whether they are really a legitimate member of the media, because to me, no legitimate media organization would have printed that. But no real media organization went near that. And so what I look at is, how is it the journalists knew that that was discredited, but somehow our own FBI decided to take the thing as gospel? We don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I can't go into everything that I know. I'm just saying, if that was used as the basis to begin an investigation, that is totally indefensible. Using a document put together or authorized by a opposing campaign, and the fact that, as far as I know, nothing in there, nothing significant has been verified. And some of the obvious things, like Michael Cohen, who was a lawyer for the Trump Organization, supposedly was in Prague holding these secret meetings. He's never been in Prague in his life. It wouldn't have, if the FBI couldn't figure that out, then, you know, what are they doing? So obviously there's no attempt made to even look into the basic allegations in that dossier, which would have, to me, would have made the whole thing, you know, incredible. And the fact that the FBI, apparently, there's reports they wanted to continue to, you know, they wanted to pay Michael Steele, who was the person behind it. And then you have all the interrelationships between, you know, the organization putting the dossier together, people in the Justice Department, all of that. That if there's any collusion issue here, to me, it's the FBI, it's the a Clinton campaign. It's the Russians, for that matter, because it could be very likely that Russians were feeding Steele information to use against Donald Trump, and it was fake information.
Wow, maybe the Russians were
and that was used as the basis for a federal
the FBI
investigation.
in all this. Anyway, lots of questions still. Thank you so much, Representative King. Good to have you here. Merry Christmas.
Okay, great. And again, Merry Christmas.
Thanks. A defiant reaction from North Korea to the new round of UN sanctions. What should be our next move as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures? I'll see you here. North Korea calls the new round of UN sanctions an act of war. And Defense Secretary Mattis is taking that threat very seriously, telling our troops they, quote, must be ready to go should talks and negotiations fail. Joining me right now, Gordon Chang, author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. Gordon, good to see you. This seems to be escalating once again very quickly. I guess I would ask you to tell us how can we effectively deal with North Korea right now without actually having to use force?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things we can do, Trish. So, for instance, President Trump can actually enforce his September 21 executive order, which essentially tells the world, if you do business with North Korea, you're not doing business with us. And that message has to be given to Beijing, and we've got to be serious about it. The other thing is that large Chinese banks have been money laundering for the North Koreans. So far, they've gotten a free pass. I don't think that we can allow that to continue. You know, we don't allow Colombian drug lords to launder money through New York City. We should not be allowing the Chinese to do that, especially when they've been arming the North Koreans with all sorts of equipment and technology for their ballistic missile program and their nuclear weapons program. This is how we can actually solve this short of the use of force.
In other words, we use our economic power with China right now, because I know you've said, and many have said, that China really holds the key. They have the right intelligence there on the ground. They could actually influence this situation far more than we can from our standpoint. So our key then is influencing China. And we've gotten all indications that the president is trying to do that and is trying to work with China on this issue. But what about Treasury? Because you mentioned sanctioning banks. They sanctioned one Chinese bank. Aren't there others they could go after? I mean, couldn't we actually, if we really wanted to, Gordon, say, okay, no more trade with China until they deal with their problem, which has become ours in North Korea?
You know, absolutely. You know, on June 29th, President Trump signaled to the Chinese that he was going to go after the large Chinese banks. He did that by disconnecting a small Chinese bank from the banking system by declaring it to be a primary money laundering concern under Section 311 of the Patriot Act. But we know that Bank of China, one of China's so-called Big Four banks, has been laundering money for the North Koreans. That was said in a UN report from last year, which talked about devising and operating a scheme in Singapore. It's clear
so they
that
lied
China,
to us? I mean, the Chinese say we're not trading with North Korea, but if they're laundering money, in fact, you know, they're doing something even worse.
Yeah, and it's not just laundering money. It's not just giving technology to the North Koreans so they can use it against us. Also, you know, just a few days ago, a North Korean ship, which was under UN sanctions, which means it can't go to any port outside of North Korea, it turned on its transponder in a port near Shanghai. So clearly the Chinese are busting sanctions, and we have yet to hold them to account.
All right. Well, it's time we start, I think. So good to see you. Gordon Chang, thank you very much. Merry Christmas. Bitcoin rebounding, despite a lot of folks saying this is a very dicey investment. Coming up, a couple of investors in Bitcoin, none other than the Winklevoss brothers. They're going to talk about the Bitcoin exchange they founded and why they think that cryptocurrency is, in fact, the future as we look ahead here on Sunday Morning Futures. See you here next. Bitcoin bouncing back following a pretty steep drop last week of more than 40% from record highs the week before that. Maria Bartiromo spoke with the Winklevoss twins, who founded an exchange for the virtual currency, and they had some words for those who may fear a Bitcoin bubble. Watch.
because to this point it's basically been a spot market. And so this is the first time that people can actually express easily a short position on Bitcoin. So what that's going to do is create a truly two-sided market, which should reduce volatility in the long term and also increase price discovery and just make it easier for institutions and individuals to gain access and exposure to Bitcoin. With this contract, because it's cash settled, you can buy it with cash and you settle out in cash. So you don't have to actually touch the underlying or deal with Bitcoin, but you can get the investment exposure to it. So it's just another financial product, an easier way to get access.
It certainly gives you more liquidity, that's for sure. And Tyler, you both made the point when you were on the morning show. Now people could put their money where their mouths are, right? Because you've got people like Jamie Dimon calling Bitcoin a fraud. So if you think it's a fraud, go short it.
Absolutely, yeah. We've been working really hard to give Jamie Dimon an opportunity to short Bitcoin. And anybody who says that it's a fraud or a bubble, you can go now, put your money where your mouth is, and bet against it. Yeah, I mean, talk is cheap, and that's right. Now you can actually, like Cameron said, you can bet against this. So we encourage Jamie Dimon. We encourage him to personally bet against this Bitcoin. Take J.P. Morgan's balance sheet, bet against Bitcoin. We'll see what happens, but now they can do it instead of just sort of throwing stones.
Yeah, but Tyler, you got to explain this because people are wondering what Bitcoin is backed by. When I look at the dollar is backed by the full faith of the Treasury, the full faith of the U.S. government. What, Cameron, is Bitcoin backed by?
So it's a great question. So Bitcoin, we think of Bitcoin as gold. And I think if you look at gold, some people point to an intrinsic value of gold, but that really doesn't explain the value of gold. It might explain 10, 15% of the actual value of gold. Gold has value because we all agree that it has value, and we'll all accept gold. And it has a collective acceptance and value that way. Bitcoin, in addition to being increasingly accepted around the world and more people coming into the system by the day, has the mining network, which is one of the largest computer networks in the world, and it's backed by cryptography. A lot of people would look at the US dollar or government-backed currencies and say a government has counterparty risk. The average lifespan of a currency is roughly 27 years. Look no further than the Zimbabwe dollar. They have, I think, $1 trillion bill, or Venezuela. The history of most currencies is really terrible. And so, yes, living in the US, we look at the US dollar and we say, well, what's wrong with that? And it's a pretty decent store of value. But in reality, most fiat currencies out there fail.
So how many Bitcoins do you both own?
We're not commenting on that right now.
Why not?
Because we're here to talk about the Bitcoin futures contract. We may discuss that later at some point.
Look, Bitcoin this past weekend opens with a $1,000 spike, 1,000 contracts trading hands in the first hour. An exchange halt happened because of the volatility and the website crashed, all in less than 24 hours. We know that the currency has risen more than 1,500% this year, actually 2,000% this year. So let me ask you, maybe Bitcoin is real, but is it a bubble?
Yeah, it's a great question. People use the word bubble, and this is basically Bitcoin's 20th bubble. That we came in five years ago. Remember when Bitcoin was a bubble at $30? Bitcoin was a bubble at $100, at $500, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. Now we're at a bubble at $17,000. Gold's been a bubble for thousands of years. But the bubble framework is really not correct to put against Bitcoin. When you think of a company, right, and their stock price, if they produce X amount of units one year and the same amount of units the next year, and the stock price goes up, and the economic doubles, and the economic productivity hasn't changed, the cash flows haven't changed in the company, we say that company is overvalued. But Bitcoin is not a company. It is a network. And the value of networks is Metcalfe's law. It's N squared. So the amount of users on a network is N. And so if I'm the only person in the world who has a phone, then it's not very valuable. I can't call you. But if you buy a phone, you've actually increased the value of my phone inadvertently or not even knowing, because now all of a sudden my phone's useful. Same thing with the social network. If you look at Facebook, the first person on Facebook, lonely place, not much to do. All of a sudden, 100 people, you can connect with people, you can share stories, share pictures.
That's a good analogy.
So it's classic network effects. 1 billion people on Facebook, that's 1 billion squared, right? So that's all of a sudden the value gets exponentially greater. And that's how we value Bitcoin. Money is a network. People believe in the US dollar, it has more value. People believe in Bitcoin, it has value. People believe in gold, it has value. And that's not a linear increase. By definition, the more people that get into Bitcoin, it makes it more valuable. And when we try and take like equities or stock bubble type frameworks to Bitcoin, it's really, it's misguided because it's a network.
Have you sold any Bitcoin so far?
Well, we've definitely, we purchased tickets to space with Bitcoin a couple of years ago on Virgin Galactic, and we clearly overpaid for that. But look, we believe long term that there's still a long way for Bitcoin's value to go from here. We think that it is gold 2.0, and it's disrupting potentially gold, which is a $6 trillion market cap. So if you look at Bitcoin today at 300 billion, it looks like, and it's certainly appreciated quite a bit in the past